This Sunday, the NRL season kicks off in Las Vegas. Four new teams make the trip over this season. And in the first chapter of the 2025 NRL betting guide, we look at how the Las Vegas trip in 2024 affected those four teams. And that's what I'm going to cover in this video. And then we're also going to look at how the trip this year is potentially going to affect the four new teams going over. As I said, this topic is actually the first chapter out of the NRL 2025 betting guide. This is a completely free resource I put together for anyone who wants to make money betting on the 2025 NRL season. This is what it looks like. These are all the chapters in there that we cover. It's a total of 499 pages and it's completely free to download. It has all the information that you need to know when betting on the season. I've gone through, as you can see here, where we go through last season in in-depth detail and in particular the past 5 seasons, and then also go through each team individually. It's about 18 to 20 pages about each team in depth, their betting records, where they perform the best, their strengths and weaknesses, and their outlook for the upcoming season. So if you want to make money betting on the NRL, you definitely have to grab this and check it out before betting on any of the games this season. As I said, it's completely free to get access to. I'll put the link to it in the description. This is the page that link will take you to. All you gotta do is put in your name and email, and then you'll receive an email with the link to download it from Google Drive. And then you'll be able to go through it on your phone or computer and have pretty much my goal with creating this was that you are able to have a reference guide right throughout the entire season. So before betting on round one, you're able to go through and analyze, look at the metrics of teams and have that information right on hand. And then in the bet finds, we update it right throughout the season. So you definitely want to get this before the season kicks off. Now, looking at the Las Vegas trip. So last season, the four teams that went over were the Broncos, Rabbitohs, Roosters, and Sea Eagles. Of those four teams, three of them were expected to make finals. One of them wasn't. The team that wasn't expected was the Sea Eagles. So they were $2.40 at the start of the season to make the top eight. So they're 11th in the market when it comes to the likelihood of making finals. They ended up finishing 7th and exceeded their win games of 12 and a half with 13 wins, which moved them up from an 11-game win season the previous year in 2023. And with the Seagulls, they kind of did miss a few opportunities early. They had close defeats against the Dolphins by 6 points, the Eels by 4 points, the Raiders, and also the Broncos by 1 point. Now, picking up wins in any of those games obviously would have pushed them up a little bit further. So of the four sides that went to Las Vegas last year, the Seagulls were by far the one that exceeded expectations the most. The other side that was pretty much kind of on par with what we expected from them was the Roosters. They were $1.35 to make the top eight in 2024, finished third, so well entrenched in the top four. Their wins on the year, they won 16 games and moved up from a 13-win season in 2023 and exceeded their win line of 13 and a half. So all that definitely looks good. Now, a couple of things with the Roosters is they got off to a slow start. They started the season 3 wins, 4 losses through their first 7 games, and all 4 of those defeats were against top 8 sides. Now, this is really important because this is where this first 2 months of the season is where the Las Vegas trip definitely has the biggest impact of how teams recover when coming back. So what we're going to be looking at is what the first 4, 6, 8 weeks looks like for the 4 teams this season. And last year the Roosters came back, got off to a slow start, even though they won that game against the Broncos in Las Vegas, but then we're a bit slow away. And then when we look at them overall in the season, their entire year was made up of beating up on the bottom half of the table. They had a 13-1 record against the bottom 9 sides, which is pretty much where almost all their wins came from. They only won 3 of 10 against fellow top 8 sides. So if you take out their complete dominance against those low sides, then it definitely wasn't as good of a season for the Roosters. Now, the other 2 sides that were definitely expected to make finals, except the Rabbitohs, I guess. You watched my video at the beginning of last season. Rabbitohs were my main team that I was fading in 2023. I'm going to be doing a video soon of those same futures bets for the 2025 season, so definitely make sure you don't miss that. But the Rabbitohs, firstly, were $1.45 to make the top 8. They ended up finishing 16th. So just ended up avoiding the wooden spoon at the end of the day. They were $81 to get the wooden spoon at the start of the year. And, halfway, 3/4 of the way through the season, anyone who had that $81, unfortunately, I didn't. Even though I thought they'd miss the top 8, I wasn't expecting them to finish right at the bottom of the table. But anyone with that $81 was definitely had huge opportunities to trade out and make a substantial profit out of that. But the Rabbitohs were expected to win 13.5 games last season, up from a 12-win season in 2023, but they only won 7 games by the end of the year. And most of that came right in the middle of the season because they were really slow out of the blocks. They only won one of their first 10 games. And during that period, defensive issues were a huge problem. They conceded 28 points in all 9 of those defeats during those first 10 games. But the one important thing to consider is 7 of those first 10 games were against eventual top 8 sides. So not only they performed poorly, but they were playing against good teams during that period. And that's kind of the similar thing that we saw with the Roosters as well. They came back from Las Vegas and, these teams have to play each other as well. And, you got to play the Seagulls and Roosters. This is the key period. If you're playing good quality opposition, these teams have tended to struggle. And there's a couple in particular as well we're going to look at for this season. And then the last team who went over there last year was the team of the 4 with the highest expectations coming off their grand final performance in 2023, and that was the Broncos. They were $1.12 to make the top 8 in 2024, ended up finishing 12th. They're expected to win 16.5 games, coming off an 18-win season in 2023, but only won the 10 games. What you'll see in the Broncos section in the betting guide is that 2023 season was a bit of an anomaly for the Broncos. Not only their wins that year, but pretty much all their metrics saw a huge increase compared to seasons prior and then again in 2024. So the key with the Broncos is we really do need to see how they go in 2025. There was obviously injuries and off-field issues that contributed to that. They were one of the sides who kind of bucked the trend a little bit. They came back and won 5 of their first 8 games, but then failed to run out the season, losing 6 of their final 9, which inevitably pushed them outside of finals contention. But there were excuses. So I don't think the Broncos' failure last year was 100% down to the Vegas trip, of course, because there were other issues. But it definitely played a role. And pretty much the only real team to succeed from last year was the Seagulls. Especially if you take out the Roosters and them beating up on the bottom sides, because the Seagulls were a side that actually only had a 50% win record against sides who missed the top 8, whereas they played a lot better against the teams who actually did make finals, so against that more difficult opposition. Now, looking ahead to the teams for the 2025 Las Vegas matches, the Sharks and Panthers are both heavily expected to play finals in 2025. Penrith are $1.17 to make finals, Sharks $1.45. The other 2 teams to go over are the Raiders, who are $3.75 for finals and are favorites for the wooden spoon. And then you have the Warriors at $2.50. So kind of you got 2 teams expected to make it, 2 teams not. Now, firstly, the Panthers. They have a 15.5 win line this season after 17 wins last year, which they just went under a 17.5 line. So with, losing a few key players, the betting companies have lowered their win line this year. Even though they're coming off 4 straight premierships, they're not expected to go as well as last season. With the Panthers, their schedule following the Las Vegas trip is pretty favorable. They play 4 of the next 5 games in New South Wales, and the only road trip they have is going down for the grand final rematch in round 3 against the Melbourne Storm. Now, my one concern for the Panthers is how they're going to get through this opening 10-week block. So as you can see, they play the Sharks in round 1, then they come back to face the Roosters, Storm, Rabbitohs, Cowboys. All 5 of those teams are expected to be in the top half of the table this season based on the betting odds. Then they have an easier game against the Dolphins, followed by playing the Roosters again, Seagulls, Broncos, and then another game against the North Queensland Cowboys. How they get through those 10 weeks is going to be very, very interesting. If you're looking at backing Penrith for the premiership, definitely hold off. As you can see by this table, they have a very, very easy run home with a lot of easy matches to end the season. But the first third of the season is by far their toughest. And as we've spoken about with these sides who kind of struggled coming back from the trip last season, they didn't get off to that best 6 to 8 weeks. That's going to give us a good indication of where Penrith is at. So I wouldn't be rushing into the odds right now for them to be winning the premiership, that's for sure. The next side we'll look at is the New Zealand Warriors. They have an 11.5 win line, which is one down from what they had last year, where it was set at 12.5, and they only won the 9 games. So well and truly went under it. The bookies have tried to adjust a little bit. I don't think they're probably adjusted enough. The Warriors definitely have some major losses of key personnel going into this season, hence the one movement down, but I don't think it's quite going to be enough. As we see every year, like travel is a big factor for the Warriors. They've got to travel overseas. Not that it's like huge distance, but they do have to travel overseas quite a lot throughout the season every single year. But of the 4 teams that go over to Las Vegas, the Warriors probably have the easiest schedule following that game. So when they come back from their trip to Vegas, they have 2 home games in New Zealand. Then they go over to face the West Tigers in Sydney, who finished last on the ladder. They're expected to improve, but if you look at the ladder from last season, it's probably one of the most easy games that you could possibly get for a trip over. Then they get a bye following that. So Las Vegas, 2 home games, trip to Sydney to play the Tigers, and then they're on the bye. That should give them like that time to reset and overcome any of the fatigue and anything that's built up, especially that they have those home games in there as well. I think it's a really, really good opportunity for the Warriors to build off of that to start the season. They're probably like, if you just thought about another one that you would most expect, but based off the schedule, they're definitely most well placed following the Las Vegas trip. The Canberra Raiders, they went over their 8.5 win line last season with 12 wins. So one of the sides to dramatically exceed expectations. Their line this year is at 9.5. So they are expected to improve slightly. They have 3 kind of tough, especially 2 pretty tough road trips following their return from Las Vegas during the first 7 weeks of their season. They'll travel up to Townsville to play the Cowboys. They have a match against the Parramatta Eels up in Darwin. Those are definitely the 2 toughest trips. And then they also have to travel to the Gold Coast to play the Titans. Now, not only like there are some of the bigger trips they have to make, the one other thing to factor in with the Raiders being in Canberra, they're traveling to Darwin and Townsville in the early part of the season where the temperatures are the hottest. And, playing in those climates is very, very difficult to what they're used to playing down in Canberra, especially during the middle of the season. And it's kind of interesting. One thing I noticed when going through the records to put this all together was the Raiders definitely don't have the home dominance that you would expect for a team playing in Canberra. The conditions haven't really been in their favor. And I'm not just talking about like the win-loss because, Canberra have kind of been a middle-of-the-pack team apart from a couple of seasons. But looking at their spread records, so how many games they've covered the spread, how many times they've lost against the spread, they have a really poor record at home. That's covered more in the betting guide if you want to see more information about that. But definitely thought that was interesting. But for the Raiders, it's definitely not an ideal start with those tough road trips during those first 7 weeks. And then finally, the Cronulla Sharks. They have a 14.5 win line. They had a 12.5 win line last season, won 16 games. That number's been bumped up 2 this year, so they are expected to improve. I feel like the bookies have been a little bit harsh on the Sharks line to increase it that much. Not only last year, the Sharks had the easiest draw and won 16 games. This year, their draw is kind of mid-pack, so it's definitely not as easy as it was. Now, they also have a very, very tough schedule, and I'd probably say the toughest of the 4 teams coming back. Not that I'd probably say it, I'd definitely say they do have the toughest 2 months following the Las Vegas trip. So when they come back from Las Vegas, they then travel to Townsville to play the Cowboys. Then in rounds 3 and 4, they're back in Sydney. with games against the Rabbitohs and Bulldogs, and they're definitely not going to be the easiest of games during that period. Then off the back of those two games against the Rabbitohs and Bulldogs, they'll travel to Canberra to play the Raiders, followed by a trip to Perth to play the Manly Seagulls, and then up to Newcastle to play the Knights. So a really, really tough 3 weeks between rounds 5 and round 7 there for the Sharks. Obviously, the Raiders and Knights are definitely winnable games, but there's a lot of travel going on in that period as well. Not to mention, a trip to America and a trip to Townsville just a few weeks prior. So for the Sharks, how they get through this first 7 weeks is definitely crucial. They also have a trip to Brisbane in round 9 to play the Eels in Magic Round. So another trip as well during that first 9 weeks. So how they get through that part of the season is definitely going to be crucial. They're another side I'd rather see how they get through this period before backing them in any futures markets, as it's definitely not an ideal start to the season. It's probably going to be important for them to pick up wins in against those lower ranked opponents, even though the schedule is definitely pretty tough. So these are some of the things that we covered in the NRL betting guide. Make sure you download it, go through it before the season starts. And it's definitely not something that you need to feel like, oh, I got to read this and then, put it away and then I'm done with it. It's going to be something you can then use right throughout the season. You're never going to remember all this information at all. It's, huge amount of stats and information about all these teams. And my main reason for creating is so that you have a tool that you can use as a reference so that this season you're betting on the NRL is profitable, you make money, and then you start to build up these strategies and tools, which is what I try and share through these videos, that next year, the year after, every time the NRL rolls around, you make money betting on it. Thanks guys for watching. I'm going to be posting stacks more videos in the next few days to get you ready for the NRL season. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of them at all. If you want the NRL betting guide completely free, the link's in the description to get access.